President Trump putting the heat on China after images reportedly show Chinese ships selling oil to North Korean vessels. That's in violation.
President Trump is vacationing today at his estate in Florida, but his mind is on North Korea. This morning, the president took to Twitter writing, "Caught red-handed, very disappointed that China is allowing oil to go into North Korea. There will never be a friendly solution to the North Korea problem if this continues to happen."
This all comes as President Trump has been putting pressure on China for nearly a year to cut ties with North Korea over its nuclear program. But earlier today, China said they did not break any sanctions with oil sales to their southern neighbor.
We call on every nation, including China and Russia, to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions, downgrade diplomatic relations with the regime, and sever all ties of trade and technology.
Just last month, President Trump made an unprecedented 12-day trip to Asia, pushing for a united front against the threat of a nuclear North Korea. But now there are new reports tonight that China's helping the rogue regime, secretly shipping them oil, which violates UN sanctions. Here now, General Anthony Tata, who served in the Army for nearly 30 years before retiring in 2009. He is also the author of the brand new book, Direct Fire. Good to have you here, sir. So China signed on to these sanctions, but China's not abiding by them?
Well, China, normally when they agree with us, they abstain from a UN vote. And now they are trying to put a good face forward on this, Trish, I think. But about a year ago, they had 28% increase in trade with North Korea. And I think they're probably feeling a little bit of the sting, and they're probably funneling things to North Korea that they shouldn't. And they're fighting a proxy war with us through North Korea. They don't want to lose that North Korean buffer between the West and their border.
Okay, so they're basically telling us one thing and then doing another. I mean,
exactly.
I look at the Korean economy, the North Korean economy, $28 billion. It's not huge, but it's grown 3.9% most recently in the last year. And the number one trading partner is China. We now get reports that basically the Chinese have been secretly giving them oil. So doing this trade transaction, if they're growing nearly 4% and their only partner to trade with is China, it means that China is not doing what it promised to do. So how do we go back at China and make them understand?
Well, I think we need to tighten the screws on China now, obviously, diplomatically. You think about fighting a war, and that's what we're doing with North Korea right now. It's just not a hot war. We've got diplomatic, information, military, economic elements of national power. And so what we're trying to do diplomatically was tighten the screws on North Korea and use Russia and China as pliers, to pop them, so to speak. But they're not doing their part, and Russia is not innocent in this thing as well. And so
but we have the purse strings, right? I mean, China doesn't have a lot of economic opportunity without us. We are crucial to China's success. So why don't we go back and say, okay, China, you want to keep trading with North Korea? Well, guess what? You're not going to be able to trade with the people you actually do need to trade with.
Well, I think that's the next step here. When we get verifiable evidence that China is actually not participating in the sanctions, and I think that what we do is we go to China, or we're also trying to deal with North Korea, and we go to China with Secretary Tillerson and Department of Treasury, and we go back and say, okay, here's the deal. We're going to crank down on these things that you like about being a trading partner with us, and you're not going to like the way we're moving.
Policy of pressure through diplomatic and economic sanctions. Let's bring in former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations now and Fox News contributor John Bolton. John, thank you so much, Ambassador, for speaking with us. President Trump's year in foreign policy has been incredibly intense, from North Korea and getting China on board with sanctions to the successful defeat of ISIS. But today, there was a major hiccup in the success on sanctions as China has done it again, apparently. And I want to read the president's tweet some short time ago. He wrote this: "Caught red-handed. Very disappointed that China is allowing oil to go into North Korea. There will never be a friendly solution to the North Korea problem if this continues to happen." This is not the first time China hasn't kept up their end of the bargain on sanctions. How do we respond?
Well, they haven't kept up their end of their own policy for 25 years.
Right.
They've been saying that entire time, we don't want to see a North Korean nuclear weapon. But they have consistently failed to do what they have the unique capability of doing, and that's in either bending the regime in North Korea to their will or helping us get rid of it and reunite the Korean Peninsula. I think President Trump is probably justifiably more disappointed in Xi Jinping in China than any other disappointment in his first year in office. He tried hard, I have to say, more optimistically than I would have, to give China a chance to put its actions where its mouth has been all these years, and this is the response he gets. It is, as you say, there's nothing new in this, unfortunately. This is what they do. They pretend to go along with sanctions. They try and palliate the United States. They try and calm us down until our short attention span takes us somewhere else. They go right back to business as usual. And that's why now the bill is coming due after 25 years of failed American policy on North Korea, and we're faced with some extraordinarily unattractive choices. And I think the president just made that point in the tweet as clearly as you can make it. There won't be a friendly ending unless China acts, and acts decisively in a way they haven't done yet.
Yeah, and I mean, we know that President Trump and his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, have differed on many issues when it comes to diplomacy and North Korea. And China really was sticking through that deal on sanctions by shutting down the banks, shutting down the oil. It was all really on China. Now with China pulling out, it begs the question whether or not Tillerson will continue with his sentiment that he believes that it's possible to begin talks with Pyongyang in 2018, because if you don't stick to sanctions, talks aren't going to work.
Talks aren't going to work whether we have sanctions or not. This is the most disappointing thing, I think, about the State Department in the past year and this op-ed. We've negotiated with North Korea for 25 years. And for 25 years, they've stuck it to us over and over again. The State Department's reaction is, let's go for year 26. I think the president has basically had it there. I think there is this one diplomatic play left with China that they are in the process yet again of squandering. And I think really what we should be doing is bringing people to the realization we have a very tough choice. Either we leave North Korea with nuclear weapons, which, by the way, they can sell to anybody with hard currency, or we have to look at military options. It's not pleasant either way. There's no doubt about it. But you need to have an honest debate with the American people and not say, well, you know, if we could just get North Korea back to the negotiating table. It hasn't worked before. It won't work now.
Yes, and China has just proven we can't trust them either to get it done. You know, I want to get back to the op-ed piece because I'm wondering what you think of it, first of all, and whether you think this maybe puts some speculation to rest that Rex Tillerson isn't going anywhere, because, as you know, there's been a tumultuous back and forth between the Secretary of State and the President, House aides at one point even wanting Tillerson to resign. And then there was reports that he was going to do so in January after a slew of reasons, one of which he called the President an expletive moron. But apparently these two seem to be making up, or are they? I mean, is this Tillerson trying to save his job?
Well, I read the op-ed very carefully, and I must say, to me, it had the ring of a valedictory address, sort of saying, here's what I did, and by the way, I'm out of here after the first of the year. You know, honestly, I feel for Secretary Tillerson that he would have been better advised had he followed the advice of his fellow Texan Jim Baker back at the beginning of the Bush 41 administration. Baker was actually quoted publicly at the time as saying that he was going to be President Bush's personal envoy to the State Department and not the other way around. And I think rather than carrying the State Department's message to the White House, it would have been more productive, and we would have had more successes if that advice had been followed. Yeah,
you know, and that's the question, because speaking of following advice, you know, the president follows the advice of his military advisors very, very closely. You wonder, though, if he follows the advice of Rex Tillerson, because there have been many disagreements between the two about exactly what it is that they want to do moving forward when it comes to diplomatic solutions in certain areas, North Korea being one of them. And after China pulling out of sanctions today, you have to wonder what the president's thinking.
Yeah, I don't think the disagreements with Secretary Tillerson have come because he's not a general. I think anybody who's been the CEO of a major corporation knows how to run large enterprises. I think it's unfortunately, because so much of the approach that the Secretary's taken has been the kind of reflection of the State Department's innate culture. And I think that is not a culture that's particularly hospitable to the Trump worldview. So that goes back to my point about Jim Baker. If you're the White House envoy to the State Department, you're going to have a different role than if you're carrying the State Department message back to the White House. And by the way, it would make the State Department a more important body in the functioning of foreign affairs if they weren't excluded.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we'll have to see. I mean, it seems that President Trump is optimistic that these things will work out, but certainly has not been shy to say that he means business with North Korea, and if it takes military action, we will do so.
They've insulted him, basically.
They've insulted the president, you say. How remarkable of an admission was that from the president of the United States tonight that not I've been played, but they didn't hold up their end of the bargain.
He took a chance. Look, he's an optimistic man. I understand that. I didn't think the deal would work, but he was entitled to try it. They screwed him. I mean, how many ways do you have to put it to get it to understand? He tried to work with them, and they haven't done it. So all this chatter about, well, we can have more sanctions, we can do this, we can do the other thing, we are running out of time. Now, I think it's perfectly clear to all the analysts that both in terms of the nuclear weapons side, where they've detonated a thermonuclear device, and on the ballistic missile side, they're very close to the point where they can hit targets in the United States. You can talk about massive sanctions all you want. By the time they might have some effect, North Korea's crossed the finish line.
So the fact that they have these missiles that may now be able to reach many U.S. cities, and you have China, which is supposed to be the linchpin, working with the North Koreans and propping them up, as you say, and screwing the president, as you said quite bluntly. What the heck is next?
Well, I think we're down to some very unattractive options unless China really does an about-face here and help us get rid of this regime. The problem of North Korean nuclear weapons is the regime. My proposal would be eliminate the regime by reunifying the peninsula under South Korean control.
But you're saying regime change?
Yes, exactly. Well, regime elimination with the Chinese. This is something we need to do with them. And the one encouraging thing I'd say here is that Secretary Tillerson let slip a few days ago, was confirmed by other military sources, that we've had military-to-military talks with China on contingencies in North Korea. This is very significant because until now the Chinese have not been willing to do it. I think because Trump has been very clear that military force is an option, that we've gotten their attention at least to some extent.
So what should our viewers know tonight? Are we more likely to go to war in 2018 tonight with what we know now?
Well, I think we're close to the binary choice of either admitting North Korea is going to have nuclear weapons for as far as the eye can see or looking at preemptive military force. The president was very clear in his objective in his September speech to the UN. He said denuclearization is the only way forward. North Korea isn't going to do it voluntarily. China doesn't appear yet to be willing to do it on its own. That leaves one way.
So let me help our viewers and me understand. We teased before the possibility people talk about a bloody nose strike. I assume that means you strike North Korea militarily, not taking out the regime necessarily, but trying to take out the nuclear program, or something much more serious like regime change, taking out Kim Jong-un.
There are a huge range of possibilities. The problem is that almost any of them risks North Korean retaliation against the innocent civilians of South Korea. Now, that tells you a lot about the North Korean regime, that their idea of defense is killing innocent civilians.
Right. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, I think that's exaggerated. And I think
tens of thousands?
Part of the hysteria here is to say you can't use military force at all. Let me be clear again. The job of the President of the United States is to protect Americans. But if we decided to use military force, I do think we ought to take whatever steps we can to suppress the North Korean artillery north of the DMZ and minimize the chances for a wider conflict. But what China needs to know, and what they may be appreciating, is that any military force against North Korea, even just its nuclear facilities, could collapse the regime.
Wow.
That's what we need to talk to China about. There's an easy way to do this and a hard way to do this. And the fact that China is not cooperating on the oil shipments...
Not making it easy.
Exactly.
Ambassador Bolton, we appreciate your perspective tonight.
Thank you, Ed.
Beijing says it has stopped oil product exports to Pyongyang for months now, and an unprecedented step in response to the regime's provocations, even going beyond what's required under the new UN sanctions. And as our Kim Mo-kyun tells us, the unexpected cold shoulder got the Hermit Kingdom's attention.
Reuters news agency reported on Wednesday that China conducted a strict no-oil export policy towards North Korea last month. Citing data from China's General Customs Administration, Reuters said that China had suspended exports of gasoline, jet fuel, diesel, and fuel oil to North Korea, a move that far exceeds what is required to do under the latest UN sanctions imposed last week, which limit refined oil exports to the regime to 500,000 barrels a year. This is the largest and longest such sanction imposed by Beijing. Previously, it had only suspended sales of oil products to Pyongyang for 3 days in 2003, following Pyongyang's missile test. One North Korea expert said the latest move is expected to deal a significant blow to North Korea's market economy, but added that crude oil exports are even more critical to the regime itself.
I think North Korea's market economy, also known as the Changmadang, will be hit hard by the cut in petroleum exports. But since the data did not reveal details about crude oil exports, the state economy could be less affected.
From early this year, trade between North Korea and China has been slowing, especially after China banned coal purchases in February. China's trade with North Korea fell to $388 million in November, the lowest volume recorded this year. Beijing's grain exports to Pyongyang in November also dropped to record lows this year, with corn exports plunging 82% to 100 tons and rice exports falling 64% to less than 700 tons. However, Chinese exports of liquefied petroleum gas to North Korea rose 58% from a year earlier to 99 tons, while exports of ethanol increased 82% to 3,428 cubic meters. Kim Mo-kyan, Arirang News.